Welcome to the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast, where timeless biblical truths meet modern leadership. We are thrilled to have you join us on this journey of exploring how biblical principles can guide us in leading with wisdom, integrity, and purpose. Whether you're leading in the church, your workplace, or your community, this podcast is designed to inspire, challenge, and equip you for the road ahead. Let's dive into today's conversation and discover how Scripture shapes the way we lead.
Welcome back to Biblical Perspectives for Leadership. We are jumping straight into a deep dive today, really getting into one of the most, stressful moments you can imagine in leadership. It's that point where a leader follows a clear directive, a divine one even, and then everything just seems to get worse immediately. Our source material is a really powerful story detailing Moses' initial confrontation with Pharaoh. We're focusing specifically on Exodus chapter 5, and this isn't just, ancient history or theology. We see it as a kind of clinical study in leadership, things like managing expectations, dealing with really intense resistance from the established system. So our mission here is to pull out strategic principles you can actually use, whether you're leading a big company, a small team, or maybe just navigating a major change in your own life.
Exactly. And we're looking beyond the big miracles that everyone knows come later. We're focusing right now on the messy, frankly confusing reality of that first attempt. This story shows so clearly how obedience, especially to a higher calling, often leads not to quick success, but, immediate opposition, confusion, even deep personal doubt. So if you're starting something new, pushing for real change, you really need to understand this pattern. It's almost predictable. #TagIWay. The initial confrontation and resistance.
Okay, so let's unpack this first move. Moses and Aaron, they have their mandate from God, and they go straight to the top, right into the heart of the most powerful, entrenched system around at the time. It's an immediate, high-stakes clash.
Yeah, the foundation for this whole encounter is laid out right there in Exodus chapter 5, verse 1 through 5. Moses and Aaron walk in, and they deliver the message, basically. Let my people go so they can hold a feast to me in the wilderness. Now, notice the posture here. This isn't like a suggestion. It's not a starting point for negotiation. No, it's a clear, non-negotiable directive. It's designed to completely challenge the status quo. And Pharaoh's reply, it's just the perfect picture of, organizational arrogance and deep ignorance, frankly. He challenges the authority behind the message immediately. He asks, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? His pride, his position, it just blinds him. He doesn't realize he's not just rejecting Moses, he's actually setting himself up against the very power he refuses to even acknowledge.
Right. And that gives us, I think, a really critical strategic point for everyday life, too. When you make a definite move toward some kind of major change, you should expect resistance and expect it to be pretty immediate, maybe even aggressive. The established pharaohs in your life, whether that's rigid company policies, maybe toxic personal habits, or just powerful people resistant to change, they will test how serious you are. So the core finding here, it seems pretty simple. Real change has to start with directly challenging those entrenched structures. You can't lead people to freedom or, say, lead a team into a totally new way of operating if you're not willing to confront the old system that's holding things back. Your move might expose the flaws or the arrogance of the old way, sure, but it also definitely lights a fuse. #TAG2. Opposition intensifies the burden.
Yeah, and what's fascinating and maybe predictable is that the resistance didn't just stop with a verbal no. Pharaoh immediately escalated. He didn't just push back, he retaliated. If you look at Exodus chapter 5, moving on to verse 6 through 14, you see Pharaoh takes really swift, strategic, punitive action. He doesn't just say, keep doing what you're doing. No, he changes the whole labor policy. Now the Israelites have to make the same number of bricks as before, but suddenly they're not getting the straw supplied anymore. This isn't just making things harder, it's strategically removing a necessary resource. And the result, severe oppression, even beatings. See, the goal of the oppressor here is clear. Wear people down, grind down their morale so intensely that they stop believing deliverance is even possible. They just want survival.
That sounds so familiar. I mean, think about any major change initiative, right? You demand something better, maybe more efficient processes, freedom from old constraints, and suddenly the friction just seems to triple. It feels like when God's plan gets set in motion, The pushback, the enemy, often intensifies the pressure right to the breaking point. But hang on, wasn't this sort of strategically self-defeating for Moses? I mean, this sudden severe increase in workload, it must have damaged his credibility immediately with the very people he was trying to help.
Yes, that's the tension, isn't it? From a purely, let's say, operational standpoint, yes, Moses' first move led directly to worse conditions and, probably damaged stakeholder trust. However, the crucial insight here, especially for the leader, is understanding that the weight that people felt, as awful as it was, it served a purpose. It was preparation. Sometimes God uses that escalating difficulty, that intense pressure, to actually strengthen the resolve, the witness of both the people and the leader who endures it. It's like it prepares them for the really massive change, the big move that's still coming. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, maybe God allows that pressure to rise sometimes. Why? So that leaders and the people they lead stop depending on the oppressor's minimal provisions, that symbolic little bit of straw, and start depending completely on the promise of the new future. That dependence has to shift away from the old system onto the promised outcome. #3 and tie. Misplaced dependence and discouragement.
Okay, so that mounting pressure, it works exactly as Pharaoh planned, at least initially. The people start looking for relief, but in the wrong place. What happens when the people you're leading start to just break under that kind of extreme weight?
Well, we see this critical failure point, you could say, in stakeholder management, right? In Exodus chapter 5, verses 15 through 19. When the situation got unbearable, the Israelite foremen, their own middle managers basically, they made a classic mistake when under extreme organizational stress. They cried out, but to Pharaoh. They went back to the source of the problem, asking for relief. They detailed the lack of straw, hoping somehow the system causing their bondage would suddenly show mercy. And what does Pharaoh do? He just doubles down, accuses them of being lazy. It confirms their subordinate status.
That is just so relatable, isn't it? You see this kind of organizational inertia all the time.
Yeah.
When things get tough, people automatically appeal back to the very system they're trying to escape. They hope it'll somehow change its fundamental nature. But pharaohs don't negotiate with freedom, do they? He just uses their plea to reinforce his power and, crucially, turn them against their own leader, Moses. The actionable takeaway here seems pretty clear. You just can't pray for freedom while you're still trusting the system that enslaved you to give you comfort. It doesn't work. You have to break that psychological reliance, that dependence on the oppressors, maybe temporary or minimal provisions.
That really is the core reflection here. Deliverance, real change, it requires a complete psychological shift, a shift in dependence. You're asking for freedom, right? That means cutting ties with the old life, the old system, not just asking the old life to be, slightly more comfortable. And this leads us right into what might be the most painful part of high stakes leadership, that feeling of isolation, because the very people who are meant to benefit from the mission, they turn on their leaders. You see this starkly in Exodus chapter 5, verses 20 and 21. When the foremen come out from Pharaoh's court, having been dismissed, they confront Moses and Aaron directly. And their accusation is deeply emotional, really painful. They say essentially, may the Lord judge you. You've made us stink in Pharaoh's sight. You've made our reputation terrible. Their perspective is pretty simple, isn't it? Before you guys showed up, life was hard. Yeah, but it was predictable. Now it's unbearable. It's dangerous.
Oh, that's just the grueling reality for any leader trying to execute a really high stakes pivot or change, being completely misunderstood, even when you know your motives are pure. And the criticism, when it comes from the people you're actually trying to help, your internal stakeholders, so to speak, that can shake your confidence way more than any direct attack from the external opposition. Leaders somehow have to cultivate this ability to compartmentalize that pain. You just can't let the people's immediate suffering or their blame make you doubt the long-term strategic purpose. The practical lesson, maybe the hard lesson, is they might blame you, even hate you during the process, but they'll likely thank you when the promise is fulfilled if you stick with it.
Resilience is absolutely key here. Leadership in these kinds of crises, it seems to demand a very specific, maybe paradoxical combination. You need thick skin, but also a tender heart. Thick enough skin to absorb the intense criticism, the blame, the pain that comes with that isolation. But your heart still needs to be tender enough to maintain empathy, to keep loving and fighting for the very people who might be pushing you away at that moment. #UIV. The leader's doubt and return to God.
And finally, we see that this huge weight, the strategic failure, the emotional backlash, it takes its toll even on a leader as prepared and called as Moses. He hits a wall, a moment of just complete frustration, confusion.
Yeah, we see Moses' own internal crisis unfold in Exodus chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. He goes back to the Lord. But he's not just reporting in, he's genuinely questioning the entire mission. He basically demands to know, Lord, why have you done this? Why did you even send me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, things have just gotten worse for these people. The significance here is just profound, I think. Moses did exactly what God told him to do.
But the result, it was the absolute opposite of what anyone would expect, escalating difficulty, not deliverance. But notice, God seems to allow that strategic frustration, that deep confusion, to drive Moses back into his presence, not away from the mission entirely.
Right. And here's maybe the ultimate strategic insight from that exchange. God doesn't really waste time trying to justify the process to Moses right then. If you look ahead just slightly into the start of chapter 6, he kind of bypasses what is happening. Instead, he reminds Moses of the who God is, his identity, his power, his history, his covenants. So the really practical takeaway for you, the listener, might be this. When you find yourself completely lost, confused about what God is doing, whether it's in your life, your organization, whatever, the key is to default back to remembering who God is, that divine anchor, that identity. That's often the only thing that can sustain a leader through what feels like total strategic failure.
Exactly. Faith and maybe strategic resolve too. They aren't really proven when things go smoothly. That's easy. No, they're proven by how long you keep trusting the mission, trusting the source of the mission, when the resistance is fiercer and the results seem worse than you ever could have imagined. Hashtag synthesis and takeaways.
Okay, let's try and pull these core lessons together then. For leadership, for just navigating daily life, what has this deep dive into Exodus 5 really shown us about managing those first, often brutal stages of confronting entrenched power? Well, first, it seems clear. Obedience, confronting the system, it's necessary, but it pretty much guarantees warfare. Not immediate victory. Expect a fight. Second, remember that resistance often comes right before advancement. God seems to use that pressure, that weight, to strengthen us, to solidify our commitment. It prepares us. And finally, you just can't get free if you keep looking back, appealing to the source of your bondage for relief or comfort. Dependence has to shift.
Yeah, and for maybe some final actionable insights from this. Leadership, especially in these tough transitions, it definitely comes with loneliness. Isolation is almost part of the package. So stay faithful to the mandate, to the mission, even when you feel forgotten, misunderstood, even blamed by the very people you're trying to lead. And maybe most critically, when life gets harder, when the strategic pivot seems to be failing, don't quit. Don't abandon the path you know you were called to. Instead, use that confusion, that frustration. Let it drive you closer to the source of your original command, your original calling. Go back to the why and the who.
And we'll leave you with this final thought to consider. Even when the immediate story looks bleak, like it absolutely does for Moses and the Israelites at the end of Exodus chapter 5, remember that the oppressor, Pharaoh in this case, is mostly just reacting. He's playing defense, even if it looks like offense. God, meanwhile, is actively working behind the scenes, setting the stage for a much larger, far more decisive victory down the road.
Which leaves us with maybe a provocative question for you to think about. Building on this material, what external Pharaoh, what system, what habit, what relationship are you currently relying on for just minimal comfort or maybe temporary relief from pressure? When perhaps true freedom actually requires you to fully shift that dependence, cut those ties, and ask God to bring you out completely.
Thank you for joining us on the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast. I hope today's insights have encouraged and equipped you to lead with faith, wisdom, and purpose. Remember, the greatest leader of all time taught us that true leadership is about serving others. If you enjoyed this episode and podcast, be sure to subscribe, share it with others, and leave a review. It helps us reach more people with these transformative truths. Until next time, keep leading with grace and walking in purpose.